6 miles to Chicago. We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes. It's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
Every few years, we get a vote, but the laws that shape our lives are written every single day. Too often, elected officials listen to lobbyists, party bosses, and donors instead of the people who put them in office. But what if your representative asked you how to vote? Before casting a vote in Congress or the legislature, they ask their constituents, and they follow the majority. Real representation, real accountability, real democracy, not once every few years, but every time a law is written. If you believe elected officials should represent the will of the people, ask them to take the Direct Democracy Pledge. Find out more at directdemocracy21.org. Because democracy doesn't end on Election Day. Direct Democracy 21. Democracy for the 21st century.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Chicago Corner. My name is Jose Requena, today's interviewer for our segment interview with the candidates. You know our host and producer, Jerry Vasilados, and tonight we're joined, hi Jerry, tonight we're joined with a woman whose voice has been a major force in Chicago's West Side. Kina Collins is a community organizer, a gun violence prevention advocate, and a daughter of the Austin neighborhood. She has served on the Biden-Harris transition team, and she's co-authored the Illinois Council on Women and Girls Act. Today, she's running for the 7th Congressional District, and we're very happy to have her on. Thank you for joining us today, Kina.
Thank you, Jose. Also a very powerful voice in the community. Thank you so much.
Pleasure's ours. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for taking some time to answer some questions about your run for Congress. I know that you're not a stranger to the West Side, and you've run for the 7th Congressional District before, but this is the first time that you're running where it's a completely open seat.
Mm-hmm. Yes, correct. And it is a crowded field, but as y'all know, an open seat is very different than when you challenge an incumbent. But what I will definitely say is that having that courage to challenge an incumbent, it really gives you advantages. Not many people in their industry can say that they sparred with the Muhammad Ali of their industry, but that was what Congressman Davis was for the West Side of Chicago. As you very well know, Jose, he came in 1991 as a Democratic Socialist, and really a lowercase D Democrat. And so it was an honor of a lifetime to run alongside him, and I learned a lot in that process.
I really appreciate that context, and thanks. And we're going to get into our pre-questions, but I just want to start with this idea really quick because we have some progressive candidates in 7th Congressional District. We also have a lot of progressive candidates and the 9th Congressional District. And, this sometimes happens in Chicago where we have good people and we know they should be up there in champions because of this process. If one past the post wins, it's sometimes a way to keep progressive voices out. So I just wanted to chime in about ranked choice voting and if you're familiar with those efforts.
Yeah, so I was about to say we need ranked choice voting in Illinois, just because Illinois is a political powerhouse and we are grassroots organizers in Illinois. And you will have a number of those type of folks, even the elected officials, some of them that they come in from that grassroots organizing background, and it makes it very difficult for voters in particular. It feels like the voters are the ones losing out because they liked so many of the candidates in the race. And so I think that we need to overhaul the entire system that's happening in Illinois. We need ranked choice voting. We need publicly financed campaigns. As you all have probably been paying attention, AIPAC has spent $15 million in the state of Illinois in this last month, just putting up mailers and digital ads, and people are being inundated. And it is to level that playing field. I think that, ranked choice voting in publicly financed campaigns could really make for interesting primaries and fair primaries.
I appreciate
you. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jose.
No, go ahead, Jerry.
No, I was going to say it's a very crowded race, and the ranked choice voting would certainly, speak to helping really fine tune, the roster of candidates. In preparing for the program tonight, we were reaching out to all the candidates, and I have to say I'm impressed with all the candidates. I've kind of been politically agnostic for a while, just because I don't know. I was disheartened nothing's going to change, but we've got a great new roster of fresh faces, progressive candidates, people that want to jump in and hopefully, guide things in a different direction or figure out how to get the Democratic Party to get their acts together, to unite all the good ideas from all of the candidates that I'm seeing in this particular race right now, to put us back on course, to just pull us out of this absolute quagmire we're in. Nobody likes Trump, but, I'm not that thrilled that the Democrats didn't give us any choices or give us more choices last election, because I think it unfortunately disgusted a lot of voters with the fact that it was kind of a preordained selection.
Yeah.
And I mean no disrespect to Vice President Harris, but the way that all went down was just a big mess. And her position on not speaking up against what was happening with the genocide in Gaza didn't help the Democratic Party at all either. So before we go into our questions, I just wanted to invite you to share a little bit about your background with our viewers who might not yet be familiar with you, so they know what your experience is, before we go into talking about some of the solutions and ideas that you have as we go into this March 17th primary.
Yeah, thank you for prefacing that. I think that's grounding in the conversation. So I'm a daughter of the West Side of Chicago. I don't come from a prestigious political background. My parents are manufacturing union workers. That is where my political praxis comes from, is that I had 6 brothers and sisters, and my 2 parents had all these 7 mouths to feed. And so that is kind of where I started. And while I'm very proud of being from the West Side of Chicago, I understand the triumph and the tragedy of what it means to grow up in the Illinois 7, because the way I got involved in organizing was because I witnessed a young person gunned down in my community. I knew the victim, knew the shooter, and it changed the trajectory of my life. And that too often is the story of so many people across the city of Chicago. And while it changed the trajectory, it also gave me my mission. And we know in the city of Chicago, in these communities, that the bullet is flying long before anybody pulls the trigger. When we shut down public schools, when there's lead in the pipes, when there's
mental health clinics,
the mental health clinic shutdowns, that is the bullet flying. And so I've spent my career in violence interruption work as a Chicago public school student. I was de-escalating fights across Chicago public schools. I went on to Louisiana State University, continued my gun violence prevention work. There wasn't a single gun owner that I met in Louisiana who actually didn't believe in common sense gun safety legislation. They did. They believed in keeping their community safe. So you had the politicians running their yap on TV, and then you had the families who were saying, no, we believe in common sense gun safety. I came back to the city of Chicago, got really involved in direct action around justice for Laquan McDonald and Rekia Boyd and the police brutality that was happening, because that is also a form of gun violence to me, and in my definition. I went on to serve as a national organizer with Physicians for a National Health Program, training 20,000 doctors and medical students across the country to fight for a single-payer universal healthcare system, which our healthcare system is a complete scam in the United States. And then I drafted the Illinois Council on Women and Girls Act, which was at the beginning of the first Trump administration, where he was promising to put a federal ban on reproductive health care. And I knew that Illinois had to be a haven state. And so I got that bill passed, codifying reproductive health care, closing the pay wage equity gap, having women and girls advise the governor and state lawmakers on any policy or funding that impacted us under Bruce Rauner, believe it or not. Bruce Rauner was the governor in 2017. And when I drafted that legislation, people said it was impossible. We were not going to be able to get the Republicans to sign on board. And my response to that is, we're not asking them, we're telling them. They work for us. It doesn't matter who the governor is, right? This is something that we need and we want, and we were able to prevail in that. And so it is the lead initiative in Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton's office to this day. And, I think of the power of people and the power of organizing, and that's what brought me into politics.
I have a quick idea on the gun control issue or gun laws. I've proposed this before, and people look at me like I grew a third eye, but I'm just going to throw it out there for your opinion. Why don't we regulate ammunition? Let everybody have their guns. Let everybody have their guns, follow the amendment. But if it's harder to get ammunition, you got to do the background checks for that. People, oh, that's crazy. Why? If you take the means by which to use the weapon away, but let everybody have the guns they're so thrilled about, maybe it could provide a solution to the problem. I don't know. Call me crazy.
Well, so caveat to that, I actually don't think that we need weapons of war on our street. And some of these weapons have magazines that carry up to 100 bullets in the clip. That is unnecessary. And I'll give you an example. I went out to Washington, D.C. with the families of Uvalde, Texas, and the Highland Park families here in Illinois when they had the mass shooting on the 4th of July parade. And a couple of weeks after we did that press conference, the tapes were released of the police officers who sat in the other room, and they were listening to those children get gunned down.
I remember. Oh my God, that was a nightmare. They were cowards. They were all I know exactly that incident.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing. That was a very human moment.
Yeah.
Because you were petrified of the level and the magnitude of a weapon like that. So if police officers and law enforcement are afraid of that level of power from a weapon, why do you think that a regular civilian who can harm themselves or harm the public should have access to that? And so when we say, how do we become preventative to it? There have been movements for things like ammunition. Even in Illinois, there's a tax put on the ammunition, and part of that money goes to victims of gun violence in the state of Illinois. But to me, I think it's also about the actual weapon.
Yeah, no, you're
getting access to.
You're right there. And it's interesting we're talking about gun control and gun violence, because I was absolutely anti-gun in the past. And just with watching what's going on in the world right now, I don't think it's out of the question to allow those who are properly background checked and really, really vetted to have a handgun or a shotgun for home protection. That's it. You don't need the multiple.
Let me just state for the record, though, I am pro Second Amendment.
Yeah, exactly.
We have against the Second Amendment, and people like to convolute that lot with people who are. My father is a gun owner and a survivor of gun violence.
Yeah,
right. He had 4 daughters, out of his children who he had to protect growing up on the west side of Chicago. Not only to mention, if we're talking about from the political revolution standpoint, this is the district Fred Hampton was assassinated in the Black Panther Party, right? Fred Hampton and the Black Panther Party believed in self-determination and self-defense and against a tyrannical government. right? Which
we're seeing right now. That's
right,
another reason.
Historically beat up on the Black community too. So when I was in the South, that was the commonality that I had with a lot of gun owners, was that it was a heritage that a shotgun was passed down, because that was a shotgun that their granddaddy used against the White Citizens Council to protect their family. So I want to just be clear, people, you being pro common sense gun safety does not mean you're anti-Second Amendment, because I am not anti-Second Amendment. No,
and you really do always have to identify and qualify that, because the whole AR-15s, Second Amendment for your protection. You want to get licensed to conceal carry to protect yourself or have home protection. Yeah, that's legal with the background checks and with regulating ammunition, perhaps. But yeah, I'm with you. We have to respect, and I don't say this facetiously, with what we've seen in the streets, especially more in Minnesota than Chicago, with these ICE thugs coming out. Nobody wants to think of like what the alternative is, but at a certain point, you have to think about it. It's like, all right, if things really get out of control here, and citizens need to protect themselves against a tyrannical government or a tyrannical literal thugs that are acting like the president's Gestapo. We're kind of out of fantasy movie land and really looking at stuff here that we never thought we'd ever see. And you have to, be realistic about everything, especially how you properly exercise or properly exercise Second Amendment rights, so that people do have those protections responsibly.
And that's the bipartisan coalition building that can happen across the United States of America, because that's a real reality of what happened. Alex Preddy was a concealed to carry holder.
Yeah,
they illegally disarmed him and then unloaded a clip into his back as he was defenseless on the ground.
An execution. That was an execution.
It was a straight up execution, and it was
like Laquan McDonald. You literally saw two executions in the street, different times. That's what they both were.
I mean, Renee Good was an execution. Renee Good was an execution, but
yes, she
to
was
that
too.
Point about a bipartisan coalition being built, what ended up happening was the gun rights groups came out and they went in on the Trump administration and said, "Hey, this is actually unconstitutional and illegal," and the gun control advocates or gun violence prevention advocates said, "We've been saying this all along, that you have to count law enforcement in the excessive use of guns as a form of gun violence in this country, because otherwise they will run wild with no oversight. And then what's the red line?" And so I think Alex Preddy, same as Philando Castile in Minnesota, who was killed in his car as a concealed to carry holder. All this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. It comes back and it boomerangs when you think it's not going to impact you.
Very true. Jose, I will pass it to you.
No, thank you. I appreciate that great context. The West Side of Chicago is not a stranger to gun violence at all. It's a big public health concern. And, I want to applaud you on being able to pass stuff in there around our administration, which pivots us to our question about healthcare, about, looking at the makeup of the Congress right now, it's very Republican, it's very conservative, and you've had success speaking to people's values. How would you try to address healthcare, and what's your plan for healthcare reform? Given how there's such gridlock against any kind of change. Trump ran against repealing Obamacare, and it seems like the best idea he has is for the insurance agencies to give you some cash to buy some stuff.
Right. He has a concept of a plan, right? And I do think it's important to name, and this is a thing that kind of separates us from other campaigns in our race. I think that you have to name that some of these bad policies were put into place with Democrats in positions of power. Healthcare is it is a necessity, and it is a human right, and should be deemed as a human right, not as an option in our fiscal budget. It should be a priority. And when I was an organizer at Physicians for a National Health Program, which shout out to the late Dr. Quentin Young, because he was the one that started PNHP. I got a crash course with these physicians who were advocating on behalf of their patients and saying, we're the only developed country in America without a universal healthcare system. Here's the good news, though, Jose. This idea of getting everybody access to healthcare is wildly popular. from the Appalachia to the south side of Chicago, right? From the steel mill workers in Pennsylvania to, immigrants' rights organizers in San Diego.
To Marjorie Taylor Greene.
To Marjorie Taylor Greene.
I mean, wow, we finally connect with something that
it is the
everyone.
populist idea that connects everybody, because it is a thing that everyone knows they are one healthcare scare away from homelessness, from bankruptcy. It is the number one cause of bankruptcy in America is medical debt. And it's not a matter of if we're going to need the healthcare system, it's a when. Everybody ages to the point where they need the healthcare system. And so the way that I see it, Jose, and how we won against the Rauner administration was I traveled to 68 counties out of 102 in the state of Illinois to let their constituents know your representative is not just getting ready to vote against the transgender community or civil rights. They're getting ready to vote against every woman and girl in this state. And that includes you. And really preaching and educating to people that our representatives work for us. And this money that they're spending on ICE to terrorize our community, this money that they're spending in a Pentagon budget that can't even pass an audit, that is money that even if we took a fraction of it, 10% of it, we could fund all of this. And it is wildly popular because physicians also want a universal healthcare system where they're not 85% of their time is not bogged down by overhead and administrative issues, having to sift through this insurer and that insurer. And so this is about people having political courage and the political intuition to go into some of these battleground states and talk to the people, to put the pressure on their representatives to get on our side. And honestly, Jose, I don't think it's going to take a lot. People's premiums in January went up as high as $1,000 for some people across the country to pay for health insurance. And what they're telling us, what our government is telling us, is that we're supposed to pay more and receive less in our health care. They get the Cadillac service as representatives of this country in healthcare. And the people who are the backbone and the economic engine of the United States of America can barely get hearing aids, cannot get their dental work done, cannot get glasses, cannot get the things that they need in order to live a proper quality of life. And so I think that's a wildly popular thing. And I would be willing to stump in Kentucky and Louisiana and Texas. You could put me anywhere. And I bet you 10 times out of 10, we would walk out with more supporters than someone talking about slashing healthcare access.
Can I do a follow-up to that? We had a comment in the chat from one of our viewers, actually one of our Chicago Corner colleagues. Access can be a loaded term. He says, I'm sure you mean actual healthcare versus insurance denial, don't care.
I mean full access.
And this. Right. And if they can find $1 trillion for rockets and bombs, they can pay for all of us to have free healthcare. So the larger question of that, though, is the how. And people ask, how would you fund it without increasing the net burden on working class families? Now, let me throw a caveat in there, though. I'm disabled and I'm on Medicare, and I know it works. I've advocated it for myself, for everybody. But you know what Medicare doesn't cover? Doesn't cover eyeglasses. It doesn't cover dental. So, I mean, it could go further. But, when I see that Medicare works for disabled people, seniors, and veterans, you shouldn't have to be old, disabled, or, injured as a veteran to have access to the health care that is also preventative.
And you also shouldn't be dependent on if you have an employer or not.
Yes, exactly. Well, your healthcare is tied to your job, and if you don't have a job, you're screwed. So, but that's by design too. I think we can all understand that's by design with how our lobbyists, control those in Washington's, special interests to, unfortunately tie people to jobs that are not fulfilling, that they have to do, that they're underpaid for. That just, further increases this gap between us and what we're now calling the Epstein class. Those that get away with everything and aren't accountable for anything.
Yes.
Get away with everything, accountable for nothing.
I mean, a fully loaded healthcare system, a culturally competent healthcare system. I mean, as a Black woman in my childbirthing years in the workforce, we are 6 times more likely to die giving childbirth. One of the most natural things we should be able to do, because our doctors are not culturally competent and there's all of this implicit bias that exists. It goes beyond that. It goes into student loan debt and canceling that, to what? Widen the ability for primary care residents and medical students to go into primary care. During my time at PNHP, there were so many medical students who didn't want to go into primary care because it didn't pay enough. And they were incurring so much debt from student loans that they went into a specialty that paid more, not because it would be most impactful, but because they wanted to be able to pay their student loans back. So this issue is an intersectional issue that does not just stop at people getting access to healthcare, but you are 100% correct, Jerry. It needs to be vision, dental, hearing. We have people in the disabled community who need different accessories like canes and wheelchairs. Those things should be covered in our healthcare system. And by the way, you should be always able to get access to things like insulin and blood pressure pills without the burden of being able to pay for it, because those are things that dictate and determine whether you live or you die. And so for me, this is the fight that I would die 1,000 hills on. And the good news for the people in Illinois 7 is that I have that background and I have those 20,000 doctors ready to march to Washington, D.C. with me. And that relationship has been established. But I'm also, someone who is directly impacted in a medical desert on the west side of Chicago, where we're seeing federally qualified healthcare centers dried up, safety net programs dried up, mental health programs dried up. And people are dealing with PTSD and trauma in our community from the level of gun violence and other issues and substance abuse, right? And so this is a very personal fight for me and for my coalition of folks.
So we have this comment from the chat, I was talking about how I know Medicare works. Coming back to the how do you convince people that it can be funded without increasing the net burden on working class families? And Ed throws in, Congress passes a funding bill, no tax dollars required. But what are your thoughts on the funding solutions?
I definitely think that we need to, sorry, this is my niece and nephew.
No, that's wonderful. It's great to see them there. My cat jumps in every once in a while.
I really do think that this is the time, at the height of the public opinion of the public right now, of how dare the Trump administration and any administration drag us into a war when you constantly tell us that there is no money. I think that there could be a serious push for the first time in a generation to slash the military budget. Now, we know AIPAC is playing ball in these races because they're coming back to collect on that $3 million. Their goal is to expand the budget and send more bombs. And this is why people really need to pay attention in this election cycle. We have to send anti-war, pro-peace candidates that don't accept corporate PAC dollars into these seats, because the number one request is that we reshape this fiscal budget. Once Democrats get the House back, which I think they will, we also need to send people with the courage to challenge the Democratic Party. I'm not of the belief that I'm just going to come in and give Hakeem Jeffries my vote for Speaker of the House. You have to make some concessions for the American people, and that we just haven't seen. In times where we've needed our party to show courage, they've shown cowardice and caution. And so this is the moment. If they want to win 2028, they have to show up in 26. And so in 27, prior to the election. And one of the ways that we can do that is by advocating for things like universal health care in our country. It is a moonshot if we never work on it. If we never start and we never push, then we'll never get it. But I do think that we need the courage to not just challenge the Trump administration, because he doesn't have a plan.
All sides. And Sanders, never did I think we were so close than when Sanders was really pushing it, advocating for it. But then he dropped out. He abandoned, that cause. So, but yeah, when you also see all the money, all the foreign aid going to Israel, to Ukraine, to other countries where they have, they get their free health.
They have universal health care.
They have it there.
$1 billion a day
here, but we can give it to them so they can afford it.
Yeah, $1
or
billion
UBI.
a day.
And the Iran bombing campaigns, it's
Yeah.
going to cost us $1 billion a day. The Iraq war cost us 300 million a day, I think, and George W. Bush was freaking out about it. And this Trump just says some Americans are going to die.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
just what
But
happens in
see,
war.
Send Barron.
this is where
You know what,
lose.
Kina, when you get in, pass a law that every politician that votes for war has to send one member of their family to join the regular American soldiers over there and see how quickly they think twice about escalating these unnecessary
I'll do you one
conflicts
even
for
better.
Israel.
I'll do you one even better that's more immediate, Jerry. I think that every representative in this country should live in the poorest area of their district. Because if you lived in the poorest area of your district, like I live in the South Austin community, you'd think different when you turn on the tap and you have to give that water to your children about whether there's lead in there or not. You would think different about holding gun manufacturers accountable when a bullet flies through your window and your child has to sleep in the bathtub so that they don't get struck. You would think very differently. And that's something that could happen immediately. But I agree with you all that this is a part of where Democrats lose. It's a constant on the defense. They need to put the blame and the onus on the GOP. They could stop this right now, what's happening in Iran. Right now, they have the House, they have the Senate, they have the White House. But instead, we see a lot of slow walking and we see a lot of steamrolling by the Trump administration to the Democrats. And that is the point of frustration for me, somebody like me in the neighborhood that I live in.
Yeah, everybody. Iran. Yeah, Iran. We had a little deja vu with Iraq, but yeah, it's literally like a reflection of Iran is a reflection of what we did with Iraq so many years ago. Go ahead, Jose.
I want to change gears a little bit, but thank you so much. This is great stuff, and I think you are really speaking to the reality that we're living in a very partisan, very top-down authoritarian government at the moment. We need courage to overcome it. You've kind of spoken to being willing to go to Trump country to stump on these progressive policies like an AOC or Bernie Sanders have done. You know, how do you in Chicago, we see some of these movements start early. So you've known about abolishing ICE for some time. It didn't have to get to Renee Good or Alex Petty dying that, but how would you propose going, on those stump speeches on ICE reform, and what kind of ICE policies are you looking at to reform those institutions?
Well, I mean, we just talked about it. ICE right now is one of the most well-funded militias on the planet. I think the 5th most funded. So to me, that just sounds like they're the most organized gang in America, the most organized and well-funded gang in America with zero oversight. You having a problem about your neighborhood school being shut down, your government's sending that money to expand ICE. You can't get your blood pressure pills or your insulin, that money is going to fund ICE. And clearly they're not doing their jobs correctly. Because if you're saying that we have a migrant crisis, then why do we continue to fund an entity and an agency that can't get it under control? So their own argument works against them.
There's a little bit of schadenfreude in the fact that a lot of these ICE officers are complaining they're not getting paid and they're not getting their whatever $5,000 bonus. Too bad, so sad. If that's the path you decided to take, screw you.
But I mean, look at Kristi Noem and the hearing, the congressional hearing that just happened. $143 million that she allegedly has basically wired to herself. And some shell company that was founded 8 days ago before that wire and is tied to her. What happens to that $143 million? It goes into her pocket. And this is a complete criminal enterprise being run in the Trump administration. It is not, Jose, going to be hard to go into red districts and talk to poor people. Why? Because I grew up poor. I grew up having to choose between, my parents having to choose between groceries and the light bill. I know the urgency that comes behind that. And I know the frustration and the anger towards the government that comes behind that. And it's righteous rage. Right? It's righteous rage. You're constantly telling us there's no way to bail out Main Street. We constantly bail out Wall Street. The biggest welfare queens in America are millionaires and billionaires who do not pay taxes, who get sweetheart deals, and then harm a lot of people in the process. And there's zero accountability. And Jerry, you're correct. It's no surprise that those names are in the Epstein files. Zero accountability.
And that's why there's no accountability, because both sides are protecting. When people say, well, why didn't Biden pull out the Epstein files to take out Trump? Because there are Democrats in the Epstein files. When Epstein arrived on the scene back in the 1990s, my theory is that it was kind of an open secret that George H.W. Bush, Poppy, was a degenerate, and that Israel was trying to get him to do their bidding, but they didn't have the blackmail on him. Enter President Clinton, enter Jeffrey Epstein. From that point forward, Epstein was working for Mossad, collecting all this blackmail so that they could use it against Clinton. They couldn't use it against Obama because he didn't get involved in that stuff, thank goodness. But then, going, and also I will say this too, the Bush administration, were not leveraged that way because, they, as horrible as they weren't involved, to my knowledge, in the kind of degenerate stuff that has come to pass from Clinton going forward. But then they saw Trump. AIPAC saw Trump. This is the guy we fund, because if we can get this guy into office, we got everything on him. In this 47 years, we've been trying to use the United States, infiltrate this government with our blackmail to serve our own interests. Really quickly to Kristi Noem, just as an aside, that's kind of funny. Oppenheimer, the movie, cost $100 million to produce. Her little Department of Homeland Security ads, $200 million. It didn't go into those freaking ads. It went into people's pockets. I know, working in media as a producer, I know that that stuff, you can produce that stuff with a high ticket, but they didn't cost $200 million for those stupid, silly cosplay ads of her riding horses at Yosemite.
I mean, it's a complete... Donald Trump, he's using the executive branch as a getaway car.
It's a gangster administration. It's a gangster presidency.
Yeah, he ran for office because he was evading prison for other crimes that he committed. And the sooner that we get real about that, the better. And I think, once again, this is the point of frustration, but why we're seeing so many shocking wins in these special elections and things across the people are tired of both. The Democrats and the Republicans, they're tired of the Democrats not taking the gloves off, but I would argue I'm tired of Democrats being corporate Democrats and not fighting for who you say you're fighting for, which is the working class. And if you're truly trying to build class solidarity, we wouldn't have to wait for Citizens United to be ended. We would eliminate big money in these races, and we would move with that level of integrity. And so I think this is, and the Bushes, okay, we may not have seen their name completely in the Epstein files, but just as wicked. I remember.
I know that. Yeah, there's no question about that. They were. It's funny now. People forget how bad they were because of Trump.
They stole the Florida election to put him in the presidency to begin with. He was the first president to steal a presidency, in my lifetime. But now it's a big.
The first worst administration. Now they've been replaced by the Trump administration as being the worst.
We talk about children, right? In this situation with the Epstein files. Like I said, I'm old enough to remember when George Bush left Black children on rooftops in Hurricane Katrina.
I remember that.
Right. My family is from Louisiana too. And, I'm old enough to remember him leaving Black people waiting in putrid water in Louisiana as he flew over them. And so all of them, are really, it's just corrupted, and the system is very wicked. And I see why people are so disenfranchised with the political system right now. And there's so much polarization that's happening. But our campaign is very focused on this message of building this class solidarity, because I do think that that's where the coalition starts. The divisiveness of white communities and Black communities and pinning the immigrant against the Black community or what have you, that is a plan and a distraction from larger issues. The fight is not horizontal. It's not the person to the left and the right of you. It's vertical. It's everybody at the top, 1/10 of the 1%, and all of us at the bottom who are given crumbs and told that it's cake.
And it's obviously by design, because, when the migrant crisis first started in Chicago, I was on the side of migrants. I understood the rage in the Black community, though, because, you didn't have money to help our neighborhoods. Now you've got money to help migrants. But that was also a way to divide people then, when it's like, we should have money for the South and West Side neighborhoods, and we should help migrants. Why does it have to be, we get it, you don't? We need to come together, and we need to recognize this plan by design to divide us. They're all at the top laughing at us, fighting with each other, when it's like we need to be punching upwards towards those that are dividing us across all lines.
I wanted to make a quick connection.
Left, right. I'm sorry, I'll say.
Sorry, I wanted to make a quick connection because you've both made a great point on separate occasions, and I just wanted to bring them together because, Jerry, you once mentioned to me that you considered Pam Bondi like to Trump what Ghislaine Maxwell was to Jeffrey Epstein. And Kina, you came to my attention early in this cycle because you were one of the first people to come after Pam Bondi for facilitating and defending Trump. And, you know, her connection in Republican Florida and Mar-a-Lago, like, to your point, Kina, like there's a lot of people that are discouraged by the political system because they see so much hypocrisy, so much corruption at the highest levels. Like, how do you build that working class solidarity to still get people to come out and believe in this system?
Well, you have to organize people where they are, and you have to speak truth to power. And that's the thing that resonates, is that authenticity, number one. So exactly what you just said, Jerry, it was like, I could peep it from a mile away that they used the migrants as a political pawn that summer, moving them into the West Side and South Side where the resources were already very scarce. But then the question becomes, why do we have this false choice of we get it or they get it, when billionaires and millionaires, I mean, when the Googleplex took to Thompson Center, there was no false choice. We were ready to just give it to them. Yep. Whatever tax breaks they wanted, whatever tip money they wanted, right? And so I think that really speaking to the heart of the issues that people care about and speaking to it with truth, but also we have to organize people where they are. I talk about this often, how in the South Austin community or Inglewood, there are all these open air drug markets across the West Side and the South Side. If I can see it, I know the police can see it. I know the elected officials can see it. I know the pastors can see it. Why are y'all driving past these young men like they're invisible? They are not. They are members of our community. And the only time that they are brought up is not how do we solve the problem to dry up the open air drug markets. It's literally an article about carjackings and shootings. Well, by that point, it's too late. So my, theory of the case is that we need to be investing in prevention instead of reaction. And what we're seeing is a government that is dragging its feet when it comes to working class people and is very reactionary to the ills that are happening in our community and really not listening to what people in the community want. And so I'll give you like a very small anecdote. In part of our district, Oak Park is a part of our district. And we have a really big base of like leftist, progressive organizers in the Oak Park community. And one of the referendums that they're going to have on their ballot is about this pool that's supposed to be built. And everyone's putting on their voting guide to vote no on this pool to be built. Well, the reason why they're voting no on it is because it's going to cost them $40 million to build this pool. And they're like, wait a minute, people are struggling to keep their lights on. Yeah. Kids in our community are underfed, are going hungry, and you all want to spend $40 million on a pool, right? And so people are really opening their eyes, even on the hyper local level, that their tax dollars are not being spent properly. And not enough people who are impacted by the everyday economic realities of working class people are being brought to the table. And the people who are making the decisions are people who don't understand those realities. And so when we talk about the class solidarity thing, you have to organize people where they are. I want to go to the dope boys. I want to go to the barbershops. I want to go to the kids in the high school and talk to them and build youth caucuses to hear what they have to say. I want to talk to the seniors, right? And it's about your intention of pulling those folks into the fold. And I don't think that the party is doing a great job at that.
Thanks for that.
Jose?
Do we want to pivot to the personal accountability piece, Jerry? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we kind of talked a little bit about that when we were going into the, corruption in government and, how do you avoid becoming a part of that? I mean, let me get to our question sheet here, though. We talked about ICE. Okay, so actually, before we get to that subject, Jose, one of our questions was, okay, we talked about ICE. specific legislative reforms I think you were talking about, they need to go. But here's a question also related to that, though, which is relevant in the conversation. What are your thoughts on reasonable immigration reform that also addresses border security concerns raised by voters? Because from my perspective, there is a point to be made that, there has to be a reasonable path to citizenship. I think that there needs to be very, very serious immigration reform that makes it easier, makes the path easier to citizenship. Right now, it's difficult, which is why migrants are coming over, because they can't afford it and stuff. So, but you also get your bad apples. Okay, they're not the majority. To paint a broad stroke, we have to kick everybody out, not let anybody in because they're going to rape, they're going to kill. That's bullshit. I mean, we know that. That's just how we divide people. But how do we? What are your thoughts on what immigration reform can be implemented? How do we get to that? What are the means by which you can satisfy those that are worried, that are legitimately concerned with border security, not the xenophobes, not the prejudiced racist people, but legitimate concerns with border control, and reforming immigration so that it is not as difficult for migrants to come in, which is why they're here, which is why Trump has exploited that to his benefit to further divide people.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And so I called for the abolition of ICE all the way back in 2019, 2020, when I first ran against Congressman Davis. And it was not a very popular stance. People did not quite know what ICE was, but because I was a part of the Black Lives Matter movement and my entire career has been around ending state-sanctioned violence, I knew that what is happening now, 6 years ago, I knew that would happen. And so when we talk about the abolition of ICE, it means that we're replacing that system or tearing that system down. It frees up all of this money that's going to ICE.
There you go.
And that money needs to be going towards immigration courts, immigration attorneys, federal workers who can help process the backlog of all of this, translators. We have immigration courts where there are immigrant children that are as young as 5 years old representing themselves in our immigration system. And then we wonder why it is backed up. It is not working because everything that is functioning, that is nonviolent, is not getting the funding that it needs.
You reallocate from ICE to immigration. I mean, that's like, I haven't heard anybody say that. I'm like, wow, how common sense and simple that is. You just presented like a great solution. I hear people against it, but we need to reform it. You just gave us the how.
But see, outside of that, the reason why I know that though, Jerry, is not because I'm like, I would like to think I'm a genius, but I'm not. The reason that I know that is because I'm older than ICE, right? ICE, we've lived in a world without ICE. And there have been federal departments that have handled our immigration system. And so this was an organization and an entity and a tactical police unit that was built out of xenophobia, Islamophobia under the George W. Bush administration. And we need to name and call it that. But if you're abolishing something, that means it leaves a vacuum for that money to go to other places. In the same way that I think we need to eliminate student loan debt. What does that do? Free up the GDP for us to stimulate the economy. And so are we thinking strategically and smart about this? And no, we're not going to police our way into comprehensive immigration reform.
No, that makes a lot of sense. We kind of talked about all the boatloads of cash that's going overseas to Israel, Ukraine, other countries where we don't have UBI or Medicare for all, or at least a public option over here, and military spending. What's your position on U.S. military aid to Israel and Ukraine? I got it in the beginning. You're anti-AIPAC, as I think more people are than less now. But under what conditions, if any, would you support reducing, conditioning, or cutting that aid? And, it's probably not as simple an answer to give right now, but how would you prioritize U.S. citizens' interests first, as opposed to the boatloads of cash we're sending to other countries? How do we do that? How do we prioritize it over here and really get fiscal spending, other members of Congress and both parties to start paying attention? I mean, it does seem that there is a groundswell of support from liberals and conservatives who are realizing how we're fighting against each other for crumbs. Instead of saying, hey, we all deserve this, stop sending that stuff to other countries.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to just push back a little bit. I do think it is an easy answer to this
Okay.
question.
Okay.
This is about the will of our Congress.
Yes.
They have allowed our president to usurp congressional powers and unilaterally make an unconstitutional decision to drag us into war. They now have the power to stop him and to move with diplomacy in order for this to happen. They are actively choosing to not do that, which is a policy choice that they are making. I believe that aid needs to be stopped to Israel. And the reason why I say that is because all aid, whether it's Israel or Mexico or wherever, needs to be under the litmus test of humanitarian and international laws. And that is not being followed. And so what leverage are we utilizing and what message are we sending to the world when Netanyahu and his government is also operating without oversight or consequence? And they're basically telling the Americans, send us more money for this bad behavior.
Yeah.
And so I want to be very clear, because people like to convolute and say that, oh, well, you're being anti-Semitic because you are singling out Israel. No. Any aid that comes out of the United States, whether it is Israel or Mexico,
Any country. Yeah, you're right there.
Needs to be operating under the litmus test of our Constitution, which talks about humanitarian laws and international, and abides by those international laws, which we are not seeing right now.
We can't just send Mexico a bunch of guns and see if they turn up somewhere.
Right. Exactly.
Not again, Obama.
And so, you cannot convince me when I'm a congresswoman that you doing a drone strike on 63 innocent girls in a school is somehow a productive use of our taxpaying dollars and not a violation to our Constitution and to our rights here in the United States. And so I am past this point. I am very proud to be endorsed by Citizens Against AIPAC, because I know for a fact that I in 2024, when I ran against Congressman Davis, I was the only candidate in the entire state of Illinois that AIPAC targeted and spent money opposing. And it was because I came out immediately for a ceasefire, because I knew that this would happen.
Yeah.
And this is not us being some Houdini or some psychic. We've seen the patterns of how we have destabilized entire regions in the Middle East and in Africa. And we continue this pattern. And I say that your congressperson should be on the side of not utilizing your tax dollars in order to do that. You cannot make the case to me that killing innocent children, women, pregnant people, the disabled, seniors, innocent civilians that had nothing to do with your decision to bomb them, that is a good use of our tax dollars. And you can't convince me to come back to the west side of Chicago and make the case in Maywood, Bellwood, Inglewood, and all these North Lawndale that it is better for us to send $1 billion a day for missiles and bombs than to open up grocery stores in our community that we don't have, to give affordable housing to people, to raise the federal minimum wage. They've made every argument since 2009 about why we can't raise the federal minimum wage, but y'all are using bombs to kill innocent girls in schools.
The executive office expanded its power. It expanded its power to kill whoever it wants, not so much to open a grocery store wherever it wants. So in that regard, the presidency is very weak. But that goes back to one of our questions. I mean, you mentioned remembering when ICE was created. We remember when George W. Bush expanded the power of the executive with the Patriot Act. What would you do in Congress to try to rein in the executive office specifically? Because they do operate essentially outside of like the U.S.'s public opinion. They only have to convince people. They don't have to convince us is the problem with, what the George W. Bush administration created America into. They just have to seize power. So how do you rein that in?
Well, obviously, we support things like Block the Bombs Act, and we want to support legislation that we can set a legal precedent. And I think we need to sue the pants off of the Trump administration. And I think that why people are not using litigation also as a form to do this. I mean, I just haven't seen one congressperson make a strong case about why they are allowing him to steamroll over our Congress and make these unilateral decisions about it. But Here's the good thing for the people in Illinois 7 and in the Great Lakes if they elect a bunch of non-traditional organizers. We cannot abdicate our responsibilities as American citizens and as organizers to throw down with the Trump administration on the streets. That is how the Occupy Wall Street movement started. That is how Black Lives Matter started. That is how the civil rights movement started. I mean, we saw the decline of popularity around Dr. King because he started to speak out about Vietnam. This is, once again, a wildly agreed upon idea from coast to coast in the United States of America that people do not want to go to another forever war. And as a matter of fact, I think that Democrats need to start using their bully pulpit to remind the Trump base that he stole Bernie Sanders' talking points in the 2024 presidential election as the anti-war campaign. He was the one that campaigned on not going into forever wars. He has reneged on that campaign promise.
He bamboozled everybody. Bamboozled everybody.
We need to remind his base about it, and we need to organize on the streets. But on the congressional side, I think we need to slap him with litigation. They should be suing the pants off the Trump administration. And it just is not like nothing is happening.
Well, let me ask you, do you think, I mean, they shouldn't be, but I almost suspect, are they just too spooked at how Teflon he was before he ran for his second term? Because they threw everything in along with the kitchen sink at him as far as lawsuits went. And now that he's in, I mean, he's using the Justice Department to get his revenge. Perhaps they see, him using the Justice Department as an instrument to keep them in line, spooking them into not moving forward with that. And it's not an excuse. It doesn't condone it, but it's amazing he was able to avoid and literally slither his way out of all those lawsuits and all of the indictments against him. I mean, all of the charges that were he was found guilty of. It defies logic why they wouldn't, unless they're scared.
Here's the thing, couple of things about that. Number one, this is not about whether they win or lose. This is about pulling the levers of power that you have as a congressional member and as an American citizen. If you continue to concede every time that he does something, then there's a further line that he will push. This is about setting legal precedent. This is about getting people on the record. And this is about truly, are y'all really believing that there is an integrity to salvage of the United States government, right? So that's that. On the second part of it, Donald Trump did not win on a mandate. Donald Trump won in one of the closest elections possible in 2024. 90 million people sat out because they did not like the strategy of the Democrats. He did not win on a mandate. The pipeline was not Democrat to MAGA. The pipeline that we went up against was that we didn't turn the non-voter into the voter. We were battling with people sitting out on the couch. And the reason why that was because Democrats did not have a good message around defeating Trump. All they kept saying was Trump bad, vote Democrat. That's not good enough. No, right? People want something to fight for. And this is something for us to fight for. Texas is another thing, right? All of this is connected. They had the Texas race, told people that they could stand in line until 9 p.m. and then went back and they used the courts against the voters. And the Texas Supreme Court came back and said, actually, we're not going to count any of the votes after 7 p.m. So when people make the argument to me, oh, well, the courts aren't going to do anything. The Republicans use the courts to gerrymander districts, to throw out cases, to suppress the vote. And we are sitting here allowing them to just bully us.
As I said in our interview with Anthony Driver this morning, we're literally watching like the Harlem Globetrotters versus the Washington Generals. It's just the two-party duopoly that acts like they're fighting like a wrestling match, but they're really not. As long as they're both in power and there are no third parties to challenge them, they're all going to continue to get rich sitting on their fat asses serving the Epstein class, not the people that vote them into office.
Yep. I think that's 100% correct. And I think it's even more of a reason that we have to have a conversation about, people often forget that America is a very young democracy. We are very young and we're going through that growing pain in our democracy, but we have to break away from a two-party system in order to put back the checks and balances that have to go into place. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that happen all across the country, where people are talking about running as independents. They are talking about running working families party line. They are, talking about running as democratic socialists, because these parties do know. In what world does Bernie Sanders and AOC and Joe Biden belong in the same party? Some people might argue that they do, but when you peel back some of their ideology and the things that they're talking about, it's vastly different than some of these blue dog Democrats. And so this is just like the conundrum that we're in right now. But I think that it is a complete cowardice move for the Democrats not to slap him with litigation just because they think they won't win.
And we saw the Democrats kind of like break apart during the Biden years. Like the Biden years were some of the worst years of my life, to be perfectly honest, like for a lot of Americans. And I think that a lot of the reasons Trump came back was because his presidency was a failure. Like he took a pared down version of the Bernie Sanders prescriptions, which was already pretty like not as extreme as people wanted out there in humanity. But Bernie Sanders had a prescription for America that he thought he could pass. Biden watered that down to Build Back Better, which was still something substantial that the Democrats just did not organize themselves to pass at all. And instead, we got the Inflation Reduction Act, and that's pretty much what they coasted on, because the Ukraine war took over, and then the Gaza genocide started, and then people were just bickering. There's Democrats, stalwart Democrats, who are not rich, they're not billionaires. But for some reason, they're very passionate about being Democrats, who don't think that they should have sued Trump in New York State. Like, I don't think the party has an organized vision for itself. Whereas the Republicans, my only, fear with independents and multiple parties is that the Republicans, being smaller than the Democrats, are still stronger than them.
Right.
They don't need to.
Well, what
they're more gangster. They're more gangster than Democrats.
Not only that, but what they're, to the point that Jose is making, what they're right. Like, I could tell you Trump's platform in 24, it was immigration. It was lowering grocery prices. It was, ending forever wars. That was like their three things that they talked about. And I'm obviously not a Trump supporter and didn't vote for him, but to take it back to what you said, they don't have an organized vision. But it's interesting that you bring back the Build Back Better agenda, because what happened in 2022 was the year Justice Democrats came in and endorsed us when we ran against Congressman Davis, and there was a slate of us. You guys may not know about this candidate, but her name is Jessica Cisneros from Texas 28, and she was running against Henry Cuellar, they coined him Trump's favorite Democrat. And he voted like 60% of the time or 70% of the time with Donald Trump on issues, and their district was in Laredo, Texas, which is on the border of the Rio de Grande. Long story short, that primary year, Hakeem Jeffries created a PAC called Team Blue PAC, and his entire purpose and impetus for that PAC was to keep candidates like me and Jessica Cisneros out of the seats, beating Danny Davis and Henry Cuellar. They spent $500,000 in the city of Chicago, where we knew that a Democrat was going to win. And then what happened? Okay, we lost by 6 points, right, against Congressman Davis. Jessica lost by even less, like 1%, and Texas 28. Okay, you kept the progressives out. But what was happening around the country? You had Mandela Barnes running for the U.S. Senate with the opportunity to flip Wisconsin blue, and he ended up losing by 27,000 votes. So the money that they spent in Illinois 7 could have went to Mandela Barnes, but their whole strategy was keep the progressives out. Well, what ended up happening in 2022, after all of the elections were said and done, Democrats got their asses kicked. We lost the House. Build Back Better was never able to move forward because they didn't have the votes to do it. Yeah, you kept the young progressive women of color out of the seats, but you lost your power because you got distracted by your fear of progressives moving into the party, that you didn't go into the battleground states that you needed to win in order for us to increase our numbers. Democrats were going to win either way in Texas 28 and Illinois 7. And it was just a complete waste of money. And
Wow.
so when you say they didn't have a plan, they absolutely did not have a plan. And so by 2024, when the presidential election came by and they couldn't get anything passed through Build Back Better, the voters were fed up. They were like, Democrats run on one thing, and then they say they do a completely different thing when they get into office, when in actuality, they couldn't pass Build Back Better because they lost the House.
Wow.
They lost the House. So like, I'm going to write a book
keep
about that one day. I'm going to write a book about that one day because I remember in that primary, Nancy Pelosi coming to stump in our community and the Bronzeville community on the South Side. Hakeem Jeffries coming to stump on the west side of Chicago for Danny Davis, when Mandela Barnes was literally fighting for our party's soul in the Senate in Wisconsin. And so they don't have a vision. They don't have a plan. It looks
actually bad with the Epstein files and how complicit they're all in.
Yeah.
They don't have a vision and they don't have a plan. And, ultimately it costs the country.
Kina, we had one other point before getting to our proposal on voter constituent polling. I think we missed number 5. Jose, do you want to cover that one?
The institutional corruption and money in politics. I felt like with all the APAC discussion, it kind of covered it.
Yeah,
but,
I think it kind of covered. No, you're right. It kind of covered it. And I don't want to keep Kina on all night long, although I've really, really enjoyed our conversation and that, we can kind of go off in the weeds on some of this stuff. So before we close, we want to introduce viewers and candidates to a proposal one of our channel patrons, Dominick Palella, has conceived of and presented on his website, Direct Democracy 21. The idea is simple. While we live in a representative democracy, modern technology now allows elected officials to conduct structured, secure polling of their constituents from our local legislative representatives and executives to members of Congress and the president as well. And I want to rerun the video that we had at the top of the show. So this kind of will help focus on what our final question is going to be.
Every few years, we get a vote, but the laws that shape our lives are written every single day. Too often, elected officials listen to lobbyists, party bosses, and donors instead of the people who put them in office. But what if your representative asked you how to vote? Before casting a vote in Congress or the legislature, they ask their constituents, and they follow the majority. Real representation, real accountability, real democracy, not once every few years, but every time a law is written. If you believe elected officials should represent the will of the people, ask them to take the Direct Democracy Pledge. Find out more at directdemocracy21.org. Because democracy doesn't end on Election Day. Direct Democracy 21. Democracy for the 21st century.
It's the 21st century here. We've got the ability of technology. I'm going to have a problem with our screen share. Let me bring us up this way. Every time I run a video, it messes around with things. Let me see if I can get it back to the 3. Okay, we'll do it this way. We'll finish out this way. But the question is, okay, so, we've got apps, we've got websites. The idea of holding elected representatives accountable this way, in a way that, okay, they've got to vote. They poll their constituents before they cast their vote, and they vote with the majority of their constituents. And if they don't, their constituents can see whether or not they're actually on the side of the people that are putting them there to think twice next election if they don't have that level of accountability. So the question is, if elected, could you publicly support the principles outlined in this pledge? I guess, for lack of a better word, lobbying for it or presenting it or thinking about it, because we want more candidates to consider this idea, because it makes sense. You elect people, they say what they're going to do, they go there, they don't do anything. Well, if you have a means by which they are forced to follow through on what they say with that type of constituent polling, using the elected representatives website or an app, hey, a vote's coming up, what does my district think? What do you think?
Yeah, so I actually love that idea, and that idea is essentially an organizing model called co-governance with the community, right? And so I think that's just an easier, more efficient way, in a technological way, to do it. But ideally, the reason that this works is because when we talk about a representative democracy, that should always be the way that your representative is making decisions about these votes, is that they are representing the people in the district. And that question oftentimes comes up a lot about, well, what if it's something that you disagree with, but the district want, well, you work for them. It's not the other way around. And I think that we've kind of gotten it twisted with our elected officials, where we treat them as celebrities, or, you know, the magic pill to solve all of our problems, when in actuality, a healthy democracy and a healthy representative democracy is one where the representative is in co-governance with the actual community. And so I actually love that idea.
Well, if you win the primary, we're going to be coming back and making you pledge a commitment to that idea, to run on it, because the more people that are in tune with this concept and understanding what it means and how easy it would be to implement, you would hold more people accountable, and you'd hopefully be able to force through what the constituents want, not what the representative is then suddenly beholden to the special interest lobbyists and everybody else. And then their reelection really depends on how their constituents guided them after they won the election and after they're in Congress, not, oh, they just say what they're going to do, but they don't end up following through.
And you'd be shocked at how many voters don't actually know how their congressperson votes on issues. So that's actually a good way for people to just know what are the issues they're actually voting on.
I have to tell you, I'm really very impressed with your solutions. I really liked talking with Mr. Driver this morning. It's a tough choice, and I would only say this: whoever wins, I hope, because you've all got really good ideas, I hope that whoever wins, they will work with those that have the same similar ideas to really strengthen this coalition and further the agenda of organizing, because you're all on the same path. You know, regardless of who endorses who, I'm hearing the same agenda, the same, agenda is the wrong word, goals from you as I did from Mr. Driver this morning, and we're aligned on all of this stuff. So however things go at the primary, or, you know, the election beyond that, I think that you would also be really a great choice here locally in Chicago, depending on how those elections go when they come around. So we wish you the best of luck with the primary and, you know, what follows after that. But if for some reason it doesn't work out, and I'm not saying we don't want to suggest that, I obviously see you've got like an amazing future here helping people, and I want to guide people to Kina's website there. And I want to thank you again so much for joining us this evening. It was a real pleasure, and I hope that we stay in touch with you as we go further past the primaries into solutions on behalf of constituents and voters.
Thank you. And thank you for getting folks engaged. Early voting has started. People get to the polls. Early voting has opened in your ward if you live in the city of Chicago. And yeah, I'm excited for March 17th, and we're feeling real good going into Election Day.
Anything else you want to share before we finish the program? And also, Jose, I'll let you,
Jose, do you have anything?
A friend invited me to one of your canvases Sunday. So just shouting that out. ESA is doing their part.
Well, I'll say this. We are one of the only progressive in this race with the true pathway, just because we've had a 6-year start over the progressives. And I just want to preface that by saying I couldn't agree more with you, Jerry, that I think the progressives in this race in particular are brilliant. And they have brought such a great perspective. But I remember when I ran against Congressman Davis in 2020, and he was winning 73% of the Democratic primary vote, no matter who was running in that Democratic primary. And Congressman Davis is now retiring, and he's barely getting 50% of the vote in the district. We have dragged this district to the left on so many issues as a campaign, and building out leftist progressive policies across Illinois 7. And the final pitch that I make to people is there is a candidate in this race who's backed by AIPAC, being funded to the tune of $2.8 million. And then there is a candidate in this race that AIPAC spent money to keep out. We are the candidate that they chose to try to keep out of this seat. And so there's a candidate that they want, and there's a candidate that they don't want. And I think that is very telling.
Tells you everything, yeah.
at AIPAC, it's an important distinction, I think, because AIPAC doesn't throw money at weak candidates. They throw money at candidates who are going to build movements. And they know who those candidates are. That's why they came for Cori Bush. That's why they came for Jamal Bowman. It's because they know. And so we're moving in that spirit, and the polling is looking strong for our campaign. And so we're holding our own, and I'm feeling very hopeful going into March. March 17th on Election Day. So thank you both.
Wishing you the best. Thanks again for joining us. Jose, any closing words before we take it out?
Make sure to tune into our next interviews on Monday.
That's right. We're going to be Kira and I will be interviewing Bushra Amawala, and then Jose and I will be doing the evening interview. And please make sure everybody to tune in. We want to see you there. We also want to see our viewers participating in the live chat. And we will leave you with this. Remember to watch over each other, take care of each other, stay vigilant. And if it's happening on the streets, you'll hear about it here on Chicago Corner. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you, Kina.
Thank you.
Fuck this noise, man. Get out. And don't come back until you've redeemed yourselves. You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.
The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent. If you would like to be a guest on Chicago Corner, please email our host, Jerry, at chicagocorner.tv.